Do you suspect that your child might have dyslexia, or do you already have that label? This label can strike dread in the hearts of parents and often bring fear of the child's future because you're told it's a lifelong condition and that they have to cope and compensate for the rest of their life. You might be up one day, down another, encouraged and down to despair because of your child's inconsistency. They're up one day and down the other. I often call this riding the reading roller coaster of dyslexia. I'd like to give you a different perspective, a neurodevelopmental perspective. I'm Jan Bedell with Brain Sprints, and what we've seen is something different when we work with children with dyslexia. We have to go back to the brain. The brain is the foundation for all function. And if the child has a disorganized brain, they're going to have disorganized behavior and poor functional ability. Where does this all start? It starts when they're very young, gathering information through their sensory system about where they are in space and the ability to move in a cross-pattern movement. We're doing a disservice to children these days because we have them in these gadgets and we're keeping them off the floor, keeping them upright, and they can't go the developmental steps that they need to go through to have an organized brain and better function, even with their eyes. These are my two grandchildren helping their baby sister be satisfied with her tummy time because that time is very important. If you're interested in more of the basics of this, I encourage you to go to our Brain Coach Tips YouTube channel and look at the birth to 4, the pivotal years recording. It will give you lots of ideas, but we're going to go through some of the basics here. The different areas of the brain are developed by different movements as a baby, and the good news is it's never too late. So when we're working on the pons level, the baby's on their tummy doing tummy crawl. This not only helps organize the brain, but it helps the teaming of the eyes. So they're working together and moving horizontally. When the baby gets up on their hands and knees, this further organizes the brain at the midbrain level and is another way for convergence to happen. The other thing that's very important at this stage is vertical tracking. And you can see how both the vertical and horizontal tracking is going to be very important for reading. I'd like to tell you Daniel's story. Daniel came to me when he was 14, and if he hadn't been homeschooled, he would have been labeled dyslexic. But his mom didn't want that label for him. She just wanted help. But she was very frustrating. One day he would know some sight words, and the next day they were totally gone. He was 14 at this stage, and he had a very cracked foundation. When Daniel was a baby, his parents were missionaries in Mexico, and they had help in the house that never let this little towhead get on the ground to crawl. These were just some of the areas that Daniel was struggling with. But I'm happy to say that with intervention, took about a year, maybe 18 months, and Daniel went from not reading probably 10 sight words at 14 to graduating on time with his homeschool class, and he went to college and made a 3.8. He's now a millionaire and has several children. Need to get an updated picture. But he didn't have to do the compensating the rest of his life. That's the good news about the neurodevelopmental approach. The next area of the brain that is developed as you go along is the cortex. That's the thinking part of the brain, and when this is organized through upper level movement, this organizes the brain to do many things. Doing schoolwork quicker, ability to clean your room, answering questions, time management, writing papers, and so much more. We talked a bit about the eyes, but there's much more to be learned about that. If they have a struggle with the way their vision is working, and we're not talking about acuity, which is can I see up close and far away? We're talking about real vision. What is the brain doing with the input that's coming in from the eyes? If there's a distortion there, they may be reading things like this, which obviously is going to deter their reading ability. I would encourage you to watch Make Reading Easier, where I talk about more of the eye issues. There's also an aspect to the visual system that has to do with the short-term memory, the visual short-term memory, holding visual information in sequence. So I'd encourage you to get the Visual Digit Span test kit. It's free at the brainsprints.com website, and test your child and find out what their sequential processing is. And it will also give you some ways to increase that ability if you find that's where one of the glitches might be. From our perspective, dyslexia is just a list of symptoms, and each one of those symptoms is caused by something that's not quite right in the brain. The lower level organization and the visual is only part of the root cause of the symptoms that dyslexics have. We also find that they are struggling in auditory processing. So when you get that test kit, you want to make sure you've got the auditory test kit as well, because that's going to affect their ability to comprehend, stay on task, and handle phonics, which is usually what they do for dyslexics, an intensive phonics program. To discover more about the auditory processing, watch that segment as well. Now let's get into another area where it can really cause some dyslexic symptoms, and that's storage of information, or that long-term memory. We believe that the storage has to do with dominance. Where is the information being stored so that it can come back out? Dominance starts with your hand, and that's genetic, and then you move toward the eye and the ear. What we found is that if your eye and ear and foot are dominant on the same side as your hand, then information is stored much more efficiently. If it's not, then one of the major symptoms can be inconsistent recall of information. In other words, they know it one day, and you're so excited, and you go back to it, and they look at it like a cow at a new gate. They just can't remember what it is. This is what we call inefficient storage. While we don't label children, obviously we have children come to us with this label, and we decided to look at a segment of these kiddos over a period of time and find out some of the common things. This is a chart that shows that we found in 28 children, there were 95% that were mixed eye dominant, 95% had mixed ear, 100% had low visual processing ability, and 97% of them had low auditory processing. When we get these skills up, the function changes dramatically. Other symptoms that we most often observe with children with this label are the lack of common sense or logic. They are often much more emotional, easily upset, hard to calm down, and they just don't have access to their information, especially when they're trying to take a test, so they don't test well. I do want to offer some very good news at this point, because the NeuroDevelopmental Approach can change your child's future. John was a young boy that came home from first grade saying to his mom, "I'm not a very smart little boy," and she was horrified. She knew he was brilliant, and turns out he really was. She pulled him out of school, had him tested, they labeled him dyslexic, and found out he had 130 IQ, so he really was brilliant. Well, she put him in the traditional dyslexia program for 2 years and a private school, and when I first saw him at 10 years old, he could read at grade level. He was 5th grade in reading recognition and 6th grade in reading comprehension. But his mom said he's just still struggling, and it takes him a long time to get everything done. So we put him on a neurodevelopmental program for 16 months, and 11 years and 8 months, he was 9th grade in reading recognition and 10th grade in comprehension. This score is much more commensurate with his IQ. But most all children that we work with that are dyslexic come up typically a year, every 4 months or so, depending on how far behind they are. This chart shows that very thing. You see 2 different age groups here, and both of them came up a year or more in reading comprehension on average across all of the children, and at least half a year or more in reading recognition over a 4-month period. So they had accelerated growth in their abilities instead of getting further and further behind. I'd like to give you an example of why you might feel that roller coaster sometimes, because you know your child is smart. They may be able to hear something and just bring it right back to you, but if they read it, they can't remember it. So here's an example. If the visual dominance is off, in other words, if the child is right-handed, right-eared, right-footed, but their eye is left, that's going to cause a problem in the visual long-term memory. On the other hand, if the ear is mixed, then the right hand and the right eye and the right foot, but then they've got the left ear dominance, that's going to cause auditory long-term memory. So that can cause that inconsistency that you see of, in some ways they know things and some that they don't. If both the ear and the eye are mixed, you probably have a tactile learner. So if you're prone to look up things on the internet, you might find that it basically gives you no hope. It's often said that there's no way to correct the underlying brain malfunction that causes dyslexia. That's not what we've seen. The truth is, you absolutely can change the brain. You can. We've got resources that you might want to consider. We have a 2-hour neurodevelopmental seminar that gives you many things to check your child on and things to do to help them. We also do in-person or video evaluations. There's free articles and those test kits that we talked about on brainstrengths.com. We have a YouTube channel and podcast that you can learn more about this approach, and I did several workshops here on this platform that you can take advantage of. We also have a variety of in-home programs. We have found that parents working with their children at home make a lot more progress than many of the therapies out there. So visit us at brainsprints.com for more information and call us if you have any questions. We do have free consultations that you can take advantage of to find out more about specific help for your individual situation.